All right. So we were talking about economics last time. Um, so what we've done economics, if you want to kind of review for the final exam, in terms of economics, we've talked about kind of what falls in the realm of neoclassical economics. We've concentrated on the law of supply and demand because that's really useful for thinking about agricultural products and how agricultural products end up getting priced. It's also useful in understanding what the New Deal price support structures were and what they were trying to do, essentially controlling price by limiting production. We also talked about how that particular strategy for controlling price went wrong during the Dust Bowl years. And then we also talked about how in the 1970s, when the way the federal government funds agriculture changed, this law of supply and demand once again has led to a drop in prices consistently over time because it has encouraged farmers to produce tons and tons and tons of bushels of whatever commodity crops they are producing. And so while the law of supply and demand isn't the only thing in neoclassical economics, what's kind of come to be known as neoclassical economics, it's not the only thing that is in that silo of knowledge. Supply and demand just works particularly well with agricultural commodities, with the restrictive issue of the fact that food has an inelastic demand curve. So we always have to remember this. And last time, remember I had Brandon come up here and go through the law of supply and demand, and then we modified that to have an inelastic demand curve. In an inelastic demand curve, the only way to do anything to price is to vary supply. And so this is why back in the trust busting days of the late 1800s and early 1900s, the federal government was trying to get rid of monopolies. The issue with monopolies is if you're a monopoly, you can control supply of a product. If you bring competition into a market, you have more producers producing that product. Presumably the supply of that product goes up, and as supply of a product goes up, the price of that product goes down. And so whenever you see people in Congress talking about basically removing Facebook's monopoly on social media, one of their concerns is that they essentially have a monopoly on social media so they can do whatever they want, and that negatively affects consumers, the people who use the platform, because there's not another option in town. If there were another option in town that was viable, you might have Facebook doing business in a different way. And so because when you have a monopoly, you can control supply, you can, in effect, control price. So we talked about neoclassical economics, how this applies to New Deal agricultural policy, how this applies to current systems of subsidies. Then the thing that we most recently did in kind of thinking about economics with regard to food is we basically thought about the underlying assumptions, and this is what we did just last week, underlying assumptions of neoclassical economics, this idea that resources are either unlimited or substitutable. When we talk about substitutable resources, we're talking about things like steel, where steel was the thing that we made everything out of throughout the early 19th century up until the early 20th century up until the 1970s essentially. But as iron ore became depleted, iron ore stores became depleted, steel became more expensive because of the law of supply and demand. Very little supply in light of constant demand. And so we moved to using things like aluminum. And so when I was a kid, there were tin cans everywhere. There were tin cans everywhere. And then aluminum cans came on the market, and all of a sudden you had aluminum that was easily recyclable because it doesn't corrode the way steel cans or tin cans did. And so there was a market for recycling cans. So you could make money. Well, you could make money when I was a kid a variety of different ways. One of the ways you could do is you could go along the roadways and pick up returnable bottles. So back in the old days, all pop and beer and everything was in glass bottles. People would chuck those out of their car, and if you were a kid, you could go up and down the highways, pick up bottles, and take them to your grocery store and turn them in for the refund money. So they had like a 5-cent deposit on the bottle. If you collect 20 bottles, you have $1 out of that deal. And you could also do this for aluminum cans. You can still redeem aluminum cans at aluminum can recycling centers around the metroplex here. And the way they redeemed them back in the day was by weight. You would just bring your garbage bag of cans, and they would hang it, and they would weigh it, and they would give you a certain amount of money for it. But what they would typically do before they did that is they would open up the bag and they would drop a big magnet down into it. Because tin weighs more than aluminum, and so you could actually get more money for your aluminum cans by throwing some tin cans in there. But of course, aluminum doesn't react to a magnet, and tin does. And so they could basically just drop a big magnet into your bag. It sucks the tin cans to the magnet, pull the tin cans out, and then weigh actual aluminum. So as steel became more and more expensive, we substituted aluminum in place of steel, and so now we make engine blocks out of aluminum instead of steel like we did in the past. So the idea in neoclassical economics that resources are either unlimited or easily substitutable, and the idea that ecosystems can store waste infinitely. There's an area of economics called environmental economics that challenges both of the assumptions that resources are unlimited, or if they're not unlimited, they're easily substitutable, and the idea that ecosystems have an unlimited capacity to store waste has led to the growth of the field called ecological or environmental economics. There's actually a research branch, a research institute at the University of Maryland that concentrates on environmental or ecological economics. This is a branch of economics that challenges these two big assumptions of neoclassical economics. And that's what we talked about last time. What I want to talk about this time is this idea called Say's law. Has anybody ever heard of Say's law? Okay, I'm not surprised. You don't really find it covered in economics classes at all, but it's this economic idea that kind of plays with supply and demand a little bit. And what Say's law says, in simplest terms, is that supply creates its own demand. The idea behind Say's law is that when something is super abundant and can be cheaply acquired, clever people will find things to do with that resource, and they will, in the process of finding things to do with that resource, they will create demand for that resource that wasn't there prior to the resource being super abundant and cheaply acquired. What's the big product that we've talked a lot about in this class that is super abundant and really cheap? Corn. So why is corn super abundant and really cheap? Because it's subsidized. It's subsidized in a way that encourages farmers to produce as many bushels as they can. As they produce more bushels, what happens to the price? It goes down, but it doesn't matter to a farmer because what happens?
Price. They get paid the difference no matter what.
Pardon?
They get paid the difference no matter what.
They get paid the difference between floor price and market price, even though the market price is falling. So they're still going to make some floor price for their product, but that's a floor price that's based on per bushel production. So if you want to make more money, you just produce more bushels of whatever it is that you're making. Producing more bushels drives the price down even lower, but it doesn't matter because the government makes up the difference between floor price and market price. So what this has led to is, I think it was back in chapter 2, one of the subheadings in Poland's book was entitled "A Plague of Cheap Corn." So our current subsidy structure, this is the section of the book that talked about Earl Butz and the grain sale in 1973 to the Russians and the collapse of the Emerald Granary, all that stuff. So we have all of this cheap corn, and the result of all of this cheap corn is that we have repurposed corn. What are some products that we have that we make out of corn that are not agricultural products? The big one is ethanol. I was about to say, what's the biggest one? Ethanol. So we take a certain amount of our agricultural corn production, we send it off to ethanol plants where it's fermented to produce ethanol that we then mix with gasoline and burn in our cars. All gasoline in the United States now is required to have at least 10% ethanol
They abolished that.
mixed into it. They didn't. They put it temporarily on hold, but it's still, that law still exists. That law hasn't been repealed. But you still have, you see at the gas pumps, you see E85. You guys know what E85 is?
The cheaper one.
It's the cheaper one. You can only burn this in certain types of engines. The engines have to be designed to do this because it's actually 85% ethanol and 15% gas. So we've repurposed corn as fuel. What are some other things that we repurpose corn for? Plastics. We make plastics out of corn. What else have we repurposed corn for?
Other food.
Okay, so we have certainly morphed corn into a wide variety of different products. Give me some products that are made from corn that you might not expect to be made from corn in the food supply.
Corn syrup, corn starch.
Okay, so we have high fructose corn syrup, so that's a corn-derived sugar additive. What was it?
Like starch.
So we have corn starch. Certainly, it doesn't look like starch, although it is. Well, it's white actually. But yeah, that comes from corn.
A lot of frozen foods have some corn in it.
A lot of frozen fruits have various products derived from corn. So a lot of the things, when you look at a ingredient label on a package of food, a lot of the impronounceable things that you see on there are actually chemicals that are derived from corn. And so food scientists have developed a lot of things that are derived from corn. So you guys ever have chicken nuggets? What are chicken nuggets made out of, basically?
The outer part is that part.
Okay, so there will be cornmeal and that. Inside the chicken nugget, what's there? If you buy good quality chicken nuggets, you get
Chicken.
like a nice big slab of breast meat. If you buy cheap chicken nuggets, what do you get? Little chunks of chicken that are all glued together with actually a starch product that is derived from corn. So Poland talks in his book when he's talking about the processing plant, which is a chapter that we can read, how when you're eating a chicken nugget, you're basically eating a chicken that was fed by corn, held together by corn, coated in corn, and then fried in corn. You're basically eating a cornmeal when you eat a chicken nugget, because that's what his son ordered when they went to McDonald's for the industrial agricultural meal. So we may have all kinds of food additives, food chemicals that derive from corn. Some non-food examples of corn. Other non-food examples of corn. I mentioned one that's in the room with you today, a long time ago. Drywall. The glue that holds the paper part that covers the gypsum that drywall is made from, the glue that holds that on there is derived from corn. Ceramics that are the ceramic part of a spark plug have corn incorporated into it. There is corn throughout our lives because it's super abundant, super cheap, and so that availability has encouraged chemists to find all kinds of ways of turning corn into other things. And because of that, farmers can always find a market for corn. There's always someplace, somewhere, somebody looking to buy corn to do something with it. That may be converting it into cornflakes or corn checks. It may be converting it into the glue to hold chicken nuggets together, or the glue to hold the paper on your drywall on. But there are a variety of ways of doing this. Yes.
So basically, Say's law,
Say's law. Mm-hmm.
says that no matter what product it would be, people would find a way to. If it was produced in abundance as corn is, people would find a way to.
If you make something that is cheap enough and abundant enough, clever people will find a way to use it.
No matter what it is, people will use it, basically.
Yep. Here in Liberty, we have Big Trash Day twice a year. It occurs in October, and I think it occurs in March or April. There's a big fall clean out and a big spring clean out. And it's a time when you can go through your garage and your basement and throw out any big trash items.
You're going with this.
Where am I going with this, Charlie? Describe to me what I'm about to describe.
I think you were about to say people get rid of all their stuff, and since it's free, people will go around and pick it up.
So what you do is you put all your stuff out on the curb, and the people who do this recycling and repurposing of goods, they know when the big trash days are in all the little towns and in Kansas City. And you see up and down Kansas Street the night before Big Trash Day, that whole week, there are people cruising around in trucks with trailers behind them, and they go through the stuff on your sidewalk there, and they just pick out stuff that they think that they can repurpose and sell and whatnot. So it's cheap and it's abundant, and people will find a use for it. This is Say's law in action, in a sense. Big Trash Day is one example of it. Corn is a better example because it's a major commodity that is out there on the market. There's a commodities market for it, and that the way we subsidize food production in the United States has created this cheap, super abundant product. And what that has done is encourage clever people to find different ways of using it because it's cheap and abundant. So, normally when we think about the law of supply and demand, we can think about demand increasing and decreasing, but really the thing that fluctuates most is supply. Even for products that don't have an inelastic demand curve, you only have 300 million Americans. 300 million Americans can only buy so much stuff, and so even demand for something like an iPhone or a television set isn't going to change that much over time. But what can change is the degree to which manufacturers put out those products. And so once again, if your goal is to manipulate price, the easiest way to manipulate price is to play with the supply side of things. We just went through Black Friday. What are manufacturers and retailers trying to do in Black Friday sales? They're trying to increase what? They're trying to increase demand. That's what sales are. They're trying to increase demand. How do they do that?
By dropping price.
By dropping price. So you can play with price somewhat, but as you play with price as a retailer, what does that come into?
Profit margin.
Profit margin. Yeah. So you want to try not to drop price any more than you actually absolutely have to. Question about Say's law. All right. I want to revisit ethics because the thing that I want to talk mainly about today is an ethical issue. So we were talking about poke feeders a couple of weeks ago, and we said, based on Poland's book, that there are 37,000 cows that live at poke feeders. And the reason that we brought this up is because we were talking about Poland's chapter that dealt with the ethics of eating meat. And I said, okay, so earlier in the book, Poland says this about poke feeders. We're just going to assume that this is an accurate count. I assume he probably asked the people at poke feeders, how many cows do you have here? And they said, oh, around 37,000. If you don't believe that number, what can you do? Go and count them. What's that?
Go and count them.
You can go and count them. We looked at aerial images of poke feeders, and you could see all the little dots. Each dot was a cow. And if you had enough time and nothing better to do with your life, you could actually go and count aerial photographs of pokie feeders and kind of see if that number that they're reporting is accurate. We looked at how big pokie feeders was at the time that the book was written, and we calculated what the density of cows at pokie feeders was like. And so the reason that we went through that factor label exploration of pokie feeders was when we see this figure, we have to ask ourselves some questions a little down the line, and those questions are, is this humane? Is this a humane way of raising cattle? What's the first thing that you have to do to kind of get to being able to answer this question? This is the reason we did the factor label method. What did we do when we did factor label? We converted cows at pokie feeders into what?
To people per your house or nose room.
People
in
per-
terms that we understand.
Per my house or nose room. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to place this in a framework that makes sense to you, or a reference that makes sense to you. And what we calculated was that it's 31 people. It's actually 30.8, but we'll just round up to 31 to keep things simple. 31 people in Paul's 2-bedroom, 1 1/2 bath, 2-bedroom, 1 1/2 bath house. Except, what do they not have at pokie feeders?
Bathrooms.
They do not have bathrooms. So this then converts it into something that actually has real meaning too. So the first thing that you have to do when confronted with big numbers is find a way of contextualizing those numbers so that they make some sense to you. Now, once you have this, you can ask yourself the question, is 31 people in my house, which is a 2-bedroom with 1 1/2 non-functioning bathrooms, is you can ask, is this humane? You have two possible answers to that. Yes, it is humane, or no, it's not. If the answer is yes, what do you have to do about that?
Define what you think it is.
Well, you can just say yes because you just don't give a shit about cows. Like, you don't care about cows. You don't view them as anything that is. You don't view them as a species that needs humane treatment, and so it just doesn't become an issue for you. So it doesn't require anything. That's kind of the end of the line for you. If you think that this is not a humane way of treating cattle, then what do you have to do? You have to ask another question, which is,
Why?
no, we know why. They're treated that way because it's economically affordable to grow them that way. The thing that we have to decide is what, if anything, should we do about it? Where in this process of thinking about this issue is there room for debate?
On what you define humane as.
Certainly. So you could debate about this. Where else can you debate? Charlie, go ahead.
Could you debate the age of the cow and how long they're spending in a certain area?
That would all, I think, factor into your determination of trying to figure out if this is humane.
I guess what you should do about
Yeah.
it.
This is subject to debate. What appears not subject to debate?
The facts, the actual cows and that amount of space.
Not subject to debate. There either are or are not 37,000 cows at pokie feeders. Pokie feeders either is or is not a certain size. Divide the number of cows by the area that they live in. That's the density of cows. That's the stocking rate of cows. That's not subject to debate. We can question the accuracy of that estimate. If we question the accuracy of that estimate, what can we go and do? We can go measure that ourselves. You don't trust poke feeders? I don't know if you should trust poke feeders or not, but if you don't count them yourselves. But once you count them yourselves, that number of cows divided by the area that they have to live, that is the stocking rate at poke feeders. This is not subject to debate. Here is my frustration with life in 21st century America. Lots of different opinions about what you should do about something if you find it to be inhumane. If somebody doesn't find this humane, if they find this inhumane, if they say that this is a humane way of raising cattle, there's not really a lot of room for debate at that point because that decision has been made in that person's mind, and they just don't care about the welfare of cows. And so having a discussion of what we should do about the fact that these cows are being raised inhumanely doesn't really make any sense because you don't have any shared value system on which to base any further sorts of discussions. There's one value system that says cows deserve certain treatment, and there's another value system that says that they don't. And if you don't agree on that value system, you're kind of at a crossroads, at a diverging point. So these two things are things that are possible to be debated, but only probably among people who have shared value systems. If you don't have shared value systems, debate breaks down. What I find frustrating is that people think that we can debate about this. If you start your discussion with somebody and you say there are 37,000 cows at Pokey Feeders, and they say, no, there are only 1,500 cows at Pokey Feeders, you really don't have any place to go. Like you're done. You're dead in the water from the very beginning because you can't agree upon what the facts on the ground are. And this seems to be more and more today where debate ends. If you can't agree on what the facts are, you can't even get to this part of the debate, where debate could very well end because you have different value systems that make you come to different conclusions as to whether a particular treatment is humane or not humane. And then debate could end, okay, we all agree that it's inhumane. Debate could end at the what do we do about it stage because we have different ways of dealing with this. Make poke feeders bigger. It'll cost them more, it'll drive the cost of beef up, but it's a way of people still eating meat while allowing cows to be raised humanely. There's another camp that says, well, we should just all become vegetarians. Those are two different answers to the same question. We can debate the merits of those two things. But if we can't even start here, then there's no hope of doing anything. I feel more and more like we're in a factless age. Because for this question, there is a right answer. There either are or are not this number of cows in a certain area at a place called Poke Feeders, north of Garden City, Kansas. Why am I going through this again? Well, because I want us to look at the distribution of food. This is a series of figures that are based on data that a previous ecology of food class gathered back in 2017. So I want to make a note to you. In each of these figures, there's a little explanation in the comment section when you view this in PowerPoint that tells you what you're looking at. Because I used to have this just all in one big file, but I've separated the data out into supermarkets, convenience stores, and like specialty food places. And so the first way that we looked at these data back in 2017 was we just looked at the dots. And so these are all the full service. So the green figure is all full service supermarkets. And you might notice some things. Here in Liberty, we have a ton of supermarkets. Down here in the Overland Park area, we have little aggregations where there are quite a few supermarkets. We have quite a few supermarkets over here, but we have this big area in the middle of Kansas City where it appears that there are relatively few supermarkets. Does anybody know what this line of dots is? It's North Oak Traffic Way. This line of dots here. So you can see things about the geography of Kansas City through the distribution of food stores. Keep this in mind as you flip to the next figure, which is convenience stores. And I want you to pay attention to this area here that seems to lack supermarkets. And what do you see about convenience stores? Liberty has its fair share of convenience stores. Olathe has its share of convenience stores. But then in this area that was relatively devoid of supermarkets, you see a lot of convenience stores. And then specialty stores like specialty meat markets and specialty cheese shops and stuff like that are much more numerous. But once again, you see aggregations of them north of the river, south in Overland Park area, and then some in here. Once again, you see a dearth of activity of specialty food markets in this part of Kansas City. A little hard to see these patterns just looking at dots, so what I did was I created density distributions. And so when you look at, once again, this is the supermarkets, when you look at this density distribution, what do you see?
This is density as in like people.
Density as in number of supermarkets.
The lack of, right there in the middle.
Yeah, you see a hill of abundance here, you see a hill of abundance here, you see a hill of abundance here north of the river, but here in this middle, there's this valley that represents a dearth of supermarkets. Yes?
Is it per square mile or per
It's per square mile. It's calculated through some density function thing in the package that I used to this, and our package that I used to do this. So I'm not sure what the actual area is that it's divided by, but it's a density per unit area. And so what you see is you see area of density here, area of density here, area of density here. And lack of density, once again, in this area right here that I was pointing out earlier. Much easier to see it this way than on the figures with the dots. When you look at convenience stores, what do you see? You see this area of density here, but the area of density that was supermarkets is now not really there, but there's this area of density where? Right there in that part of the city that I pointed out earlier. The reason I can point it out precisely is because I did these density plots and see what they look like. And then when you look at specialty stores, you once again see an area of density here, an area of density here, and an area of density here just above the river. But once again, you see this little valley of lack of availability of specialty markets in that area of Kansas City. What is in that area of Kansas City? Who lives there? Lower income area. Yeah. That's area east of Truce, south of the river, and north of the plaza, basically. So an area east of Truce, north of the plaza, and south of the river. Who lives there?
Poor people.
Poor people. Can you provide another descriptor of them?
minorities?
Minority people live there, in particular black people live there. This is the uncomfortable part of the class. This is an area of Kansas City that is predominantly black. The area east of Truce is well known as being a racial dividing line in Kansas City. And one of the things that you find in that section of the city is a lack of electricity. And this actually negates what I was going to do next, because I need internet access to do what is next.
Surely it will come back.
We still have internet.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
That's weird. We'll lose internet because, well, that thing still has power.
Well, yeah, the internet is tied into the power as well.
Okay. Well then, so there's this section of town that lacks supermarkets, lacks specialty food stores, but has a plethora of convenience stores. And so people in that area, if they're going to go and get food, they're going to be primarily buying their food at convenience store locations, Minute Marts and things like that, rather than at a full service supermarket, which means they're not going to have as good access to what kinds of food. They're not going to have very good access to fresh produce and things like that. We know from dietary recommendations from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, what should you be eating? Fruits and vegetables. Stop at your local minute market. What do you not generally find? Fresh fruits and vegetables. They may have a couple of bananas hanging around someplace, but you're not going to find green beans and squash and spinach and broccoli and things like that. Yeah.
Those people probably typically wouldn't even be buying those foods in the first place because it's a lot more expensive to buy healthier food than it would be to go and
Yeah. So here's the question. It's a chicken and egg sort of thing. So there's also the price of fresh fruits and vegetables. That is an issue. Fruits and vegetables are more expensive, but they are also possibly conditioned to not buy fruits and vegetables regardless of price because they're just not available, and so they get out of the habit of buying those things. They don't cook in ways that utilize those things. I had my first turnips over the weekend. Never eaten turnips. Why have I never eaten turnips? Well, because they were just never part of my mix of foods to eat.
also disgusting.
You know, they weren't bad. They were boiled and then slathered in butter, which made them all better. This is good because now I can do this. So, back to this question of why. So they don't have access to fruits and vegetables because they're buying food at convenience stores. So then the question is, why are there no supermarkets, full-service supermarkets in this section of Kansas City? Sydney, you look like you have an answer.
Well, I mean, it kind of varies. Like, there's multiple answers, I feel like, because, like, one, because there's no, like, market there, because, like, they don't want...
People live there?
Well, people live there, but, like, people can't, like, afford to buy. And there's also, like, partially, like, I mean, not a monopoly per se, but, like, since there's only one convenience store, they're able to control price more.
So the question is, if you were a business major and you went to work at a supermarket company, Hy-Vee, for example, or Cosentino's Price Chopper, or whatever, where do you want to put a supermarket?
The suburbs.
Well, just think about supply and demand. Where would it be good to put a supermarket?
Where the most people are.
Where the most people are, and presumably where you're not doing what with other supermarkets? Competing. If you were a supermarket mogul, where on this map would you want to put a supermarket?
Right in the middle of Kansas City.
Right in the middle of this blank spot on the map. Yeah, there is no supermarket there. So food deserts are defined in a variety of ways depending on which researcher you talk to and which researchers' papers you're reading in the literature. But most people use a measure of if you're more than a mile of walking distance from a food outlet, you're in a food desert. And they define food outlets variously. In some cases, that would be more than a mile from a convenience store, which would then indicate not a food desert. I define it a little more stringently because convenience stores aren't great places to buy food. It's expensive there, generally speaking, and you don't have the variety that you have at a full-service supermarket. So I generally think of food deserts as access to a full-service supermarket. Within 2 miles of my house, I have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 full-service supermarkets literally within 2 miles of my house.
What would you consider a full-service supermarket? Because in Liberty we have the Hy-Vee and the 2 Price Choppers.
Hy-Vee, Price Chopper, Aldi, Natural Grocers, Sprouts, Target, Walmart, those all have grocery sections full of one. What? We don't have a Whole Foods up here.
We should.
So any of those things where you can go and there's a produce section, there's a dairy section, there's a all the staples, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that Target and Walmart also have another retail.
I forgot
retail
that
kind of-
Walmart had.
Yeah. You don't think about those because back when I was a kid, Walmart just sold like clothes and sporting goods and stuff like that. There was no market in Walmart when I was a kid. So you would think that this would be a prime spot for a full-service supermarket because you have a bunch of people who it would be the closest supermarket to their place that they live. And so it seems like you would then have the corner of the market, so to speak, for people doing grocery shopping in that area, and yet there's still, as to this day, it isn't a supermarket in that area, and there's no plans to build one there, as far as I know. So part of the issue could be that people can afford to go to the supermarket and buy food, but they're going to a minute bar and buying food, which is actually more expensive. So one would think that if they had the option to go to a supermarket, they would probably take the supermarket up on it simply because it would probably have lower prices.
Kind of to add to that, in Dallas, there's a food drop just like this, and I'm really familiar with it. I go down there to Bonton, which is South Dallas, and help them out. And I talked to one individual, and he said that we do have access to a Walmart, but there's no cars. The only way to get to that is through bus, and it takes them literally 4 to 6 hours.
So they have access to it, but it's too far away. It's too far away. In order for them to access it easily, that's what makes it a food market. So yeah, you could bus your way out of this or hitch a ride with friends or things like this, but this is why a lot of researchers who do research in this area basically are like, are you more than a mile walk from one of these outlets? Because a lot of these people in these areas don't have cars. And so if you're going to a supermarket, when I go to a supermarket, I go to the supermarket typically once a week. Guess what I'm coming home with? Lots of bags of food. And if I had to carry those a mile, I'd be like, no way. I'm either going to make more trips with fewer things bought, or I'm not going to go. I'm going to go someplace closer to my house. But I have a bike. I have a bike with panniers on it. I can stuff a lot of crap in those panniers and bike my way home. But not everybody has a bike with panniers on it. Why else? Think more broadly about this issue. Why else are there not supermarkets there? Why is there an aggregation of African American people in this section of Kansas City? Anybody?
Not just in Kansas City, but I feel like
It's in every major city.
it's in every major city. It's South.
What section of Dallas are you? Are you from Dallas?
I'm from Dallas.
Oh, you're from Dallas. I got my PhD at the University of Texas at Arlington. Yeah. What specific sections of Dallas are you talking about? I'm thinking of Oak Cliff.
Oak Cliff, South Dallas, Bonton.
Yeah. So there's this section of Dallas. Once again, it's just south of a river. It's just south of the Trinity River, and it's a section of town that is predominantly African American, and now it's, I think, more Mexican as well.
Right.
But a lot of minorities settled there because rents are cheap, housing is poor quality, which is why rents are cheap, and so you go to places that you can afford. So my question is, why in all major cities is there this section where minorities are found in abundance, and they're not found in other parts of the city? And that filters into then where companies put supermarkets, where companies put food outlets of various types, where schools are placed and the quality of those schools, et cetera, et cetera. This has this big trickle-down effect. We see it in the distribution of supermarkets because we're concentrating on food, but it has all of these repercussions. Why are these sections of town not racially homogeneous, not more racially mixed? Sydney can see where I'm going with this, even though she may not know the precise answer.
Yeah, she's
No.
typing the answer, but she won't say it.
Okay, I don't know.
You guys know what redlining is? Anybody ever hear that term? Sydney? I'm sorry, Riley.
Isn't it where they redraw district lines for voting?
No, that's actually gerrymandering. Redlining?
Historically, there's been like, what's his face? Never mind. Historically, it's been like that area. They've been trying to change it up.
Almost all of you have your computers out on your desk. Look up what redlining is. And a couple of people found it.
Denial of various various services to residents of specific all can racially associated through neighborhoods or communities, either directly or through selective raising of prices.
Back during the New Deal, realtors got together. So this is the early part of the 20th century. Bankers got together with real estate people and basically said, we're only going to offer people loans in certain parts of the city. And we're only going to offer loans to white people in certain parts of the city, and we're only going to offer loans to black people in other parts of the city. The interest rates that we pay on those loans are going to be different. And in some parts of the city, we're not going to offer loans on anything. It was a well-established practice. Not only that, they wrote it all down.
What was the name of the guy that did that?
Well, it wasn't just one guy. It was done by bankers and real estate agents in all of the major cities for the most part. So it wasn't one guy. It was basically just this accepted strategy for how you would parcel up the land in a city. So you can go to the internet and you can find the definition of redlining on Wikipedia, which is where I assume you just looked. And the interesting thing about the entry on Wikipedia is you'll see that it says, while the best known examples of redlining have involved denial of financial services such as banking or insurance, other services such as healthcare and even supermarkets have been denied to residents. So we see the influence of redlining in Kansas City by the current distribution of supermarkets and the lack of supermarkets in certain parts of town. If we go to Google Earth, this is the section of town that we're talking about. South of the river, this is Troost. No, that's Prospect. Here's Troost right here. So this area east of Troost, around the Paseo, there's just a controversy about the renaming of the Paseo. A couple of years ago, they renamed the Paseo Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. They've changed the name back to the Paseo. It went up for a vote in the elections at the beginning of November. This area is predominantly African American. Yeah.
So it's just a form of systematic racism.
It is a form of systematic racism. Yes, this is where I'm headed. So you can go to a website called the Mapping Inequality website. And what they've done is they have gone in and done research looking back at real estate records from the first half of the 20th century. And they have found what parts of the city were redlined. Oh, look at that. Redlining in that area east of Troost, all these areas that show up as red, east of Troost, north of the plaza, and south of the river. And what is interesting about these things is that they weren't even subtle about it. So when you click on these areas, you can read the description of the areas. This neighborhood in the rolling hills of the eastern fringe of the Kansas City residential area is built up 25 to 35% with small, cheap frame houses, all one story. It was open for development 16 years ago when a typical scene after dark was workmen building their own houses in the light of automobile headlights. The average size of the houses is 4 rooms. That section between Monroe and Morton, 43rd to 39th, is vacant. WPA workers have just finished extending Cleveland Avenue through this vacant strip. The area has adequate schools and fair transportation and all utilities. Many of the streets are unpaved. It is separated by a natural barrier, a hill from D31, the Negro District to the east, occupied by such as truck drivers and other low-income workers. There's a bunch of misspellings in these things. Low-income laborers. It is a poor section not destined for uptrend, and it's in red because in the coding system back then there were green areas for best places for development, 9 still desirable, green for best, blue for still desirable, yellow for definitely declining, and red for hazardous. And so they actually graded sections of the city. And they basically said, these are sections of the city that are not good areas for investment and development. And as a result, banks were less likely to give people loans for those places, and the people that they were likely to give loans to happened to be minorities. And so people went where they could get a loan to buy a house, and if you're selectively governing who you give loans to in different parts of the city, you basically segregate a city, not because there's any sort of governmental organization saying one group of people are going to live over here, another group of people are going to live over here. It becomes segregated because of differences in income and differences in an ability to get a loan. In the same way, if you were a business person who was a grocer and you wanted to get a loan from a bank to put a supermarket in one of these red areas, the supermarket wouldn't give you a loan because you're basically a low risk. You're high risk because of the demographics of the areas that are around there. And you drive down Troost today or Paseo today, and what you see is a largely African American community with relatively few white people living there. And this is the holdover of things that happened in the first half of the 20th century. And those people don't have a supermarket nearby. Yeah.
I remember it was J.C. Nichols' company.
Nichols is well known in this area for being one of the big advocates and players in the redlining of this particular city, but it wasn't limited to Kansas City. I'm not connected to the internet, really. It wasn't just Kansas City. The circles. All right, I'm having some technical difficulties. Go to the main page on the Mapping Inequality website, and it basically shows you the cities, and it shows you the degree to which, basically by the degree to which the red, the yellow, and the green and blue are there. It basically shows you kind of what proportion of the city was redlined versus not redlined in the first half of the 20th century. So it was widespread through all the major cities in the United States. Just because J.C. Nichols happened to be one of the drivers of it in this particular city doesn't mean that he was the architect of this at a nationwide scale. This was just a common practice that was viewed as totally appropriate way of essentially doling out loans for people to get homes.
So do you think the nonprofits that are working like inner city that are starting like gardens, like I think Cultivate KC is doing one, and I know like a lot of local like churches start gardens and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like helping? Like,
yeah, I think community gardens have a possibility. So this goes back to my decision. The reason that I wanted to preface this with a discussion of how we talk about ethics is we can look at the data. So we can go back to the map and we can say, okay, I didn't build this data set. What I did back in 2017 is I went to the ecology of food students and I assigned to them different sections of town. And I said, go on to a mapping service or do an internet search or whatever. And for this geographic area, I want you to find every convenience store, every supermarket, and every specialty market. And I want you to go on Google Maps and find the latitude and longitude. And so I had them give me an Excel file that had the name of the store so that I could evaluate whether they had classified it correctly. Classification, which was supermarkets, convenience stores, or F was for frou-frou, specialty stores. So they had the name, the type, the latitude, and the longitude. And I divided the class up into 5 different groups. It was a much bigger class, which is why we could do this. gave them a due date for getting the data, and then once I had all of their data, I went through and I made sure that they had done the classification correctly. And then there were also some keystroke errors where there were latitudes and longitudes that were just way outside of Kansas City, and I deleted those and got to this map. I didn't tell them what the purpose for the map was. I just said, go to the city, find places where people can find food. I excluded fast food markets, although you can guess what fast food market distributions would probably be based on these other maps. And then, so without any idea of what my underlying reasons for doing this were, this is the map they produced. So, in that decision making, in terms of kind of ethical thinking, this would be 37,000 pigs, or 37,000 cows at Koki feeders. This is the map. People in the suburbs have good access to food. People in the center of the city have poor access to food. This is the fact. Back to Sydney's question, then the question is this an ethical distribution of food? The answers to that question are yes, it is ethical, or no, it's not ethical. And if the answer is no, it's not ethical, then the next question is, well, what are we going to do about it, if anything? Two of those things are subject to debate. What are you going to do about it, and is it ethical? What's not up to debate is where grocery stores are located. Grocery stores are located where we're located. Now we can think about what the societal procedures were by which there aren't very many superstores in the center of the city of Kansas City. We can think about the historical antecedents to lead this to being the situation in the year 2017. And we can ask whether or not those were ethical decisions, things like that. But it doesn't change the reality on the ground right now, which is that there's a big chunk of the population of Kansas City that doesn't have easy access to a full-service supermarket. So then the question is that something that we think should be? And if we think that it's something that shouldn't be, what should be done about it? In the case of what Sydney mentions, there are people in the inner cities that are establishing community gardens and things like that, which are putting the kinds of food that aren't normally available to these communities and making it available to them. But trust me, you have to get into canning and things like that. I just ate my last edamame of the year last night for dinner because we harvested it at the end of the season and we've been eating it throughout the fall, and now we're done because all of our edamame in our freezer has been consumed. Yeah.
They put seasonal on it. Like, is that how you eat it?
Yeah, we put kosher salt on it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
so
steamed in a bowl of salt.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so good.
What is it? What do you?
Edamame, it's edible soybeans. So rather than commodity soybeans, which you let get hard and dry, you harvest these while they're still green, and you can just so soybean plants produce a ton of soybeans. You can plant a little small area of soybeans in your home garden and get a lot of soybeans. You just pull the pods off, rinse them, blanch them for like 3 minutes in boiling water, and then put them in freezer bags and stuff them in the freezer.
Okay.
And so we just put a bunch of bags of edamame that were like enough for me and Elizabeth for one meal. And then we just pull them out when we feel like, oh, we don't have any other vegetables, let's pull out some edamame.
They're still at the Walmart though, right?
Yeah, you can get them frozen at Walmart.
What are they saying that was like? Are you saying those last that you produced?
Oh, these are ones that I produce. Yeah. So my point is, if you're depending on a community garden to provide fruits and vegetables to yourself, you have to grow enough during the winter, and you have to have like enough storage space in your house to store canned goods, or you have to have enough storage space in your freezer to store all those things up to eat them throughout the winter, because in this environment, you're not going to be harvesting from that community garden output throughout the winter. What are you guys looking at?
We didn't know exactly what green beans were.
Jesus.
No, like we know what they are, but we didn't know like how they were like. You just grow green beans.
Oh yeah.
Have you never been to like a farmer's market?
You just grow green beans. We had green beans. We also had purple
Well, it
beans.
says immature or young pods of the runner bean, yard-long bean, or the hyacinth bean. Oh wait, no, those are using a similar. Never mind, I take that back.
Yeah, those are green beans. Those are different than
Those are
soybeans.
different. Those are
Yeah,
different.
different than soybeans. So if you don't have a freezer, an extra freezer, which you probably don't if you're low income, to store your frozen goods from your community garden, you're going to eventually run out of the food from your community garden, and then you're going to be back buying your food at convenience stores and things like this. I've learned over the last decade, I've relearned actually, I knew this when I was a kid, how to can. Because I take a lot of the stuff that I grow in my backyard garden and I can. But if you can, you have to have a pressure cooker and things like that. Pressure cookers are expensive. And you can can without pressure cooking, just boiling on the stove with certain things, but certain things require the application of pressure also. I don't own a pressure cooker and I don't really want to buy one. When I can things that need that, I bring them to the autoclave up in the biology department and can them there. Don't tell anybody. It's actually, what's that?
Make use of the resources you have.
Make use of the resources you have, and they're like, but that's disgusting. We put microbes and stuff in there. Yeah, for sterilization. Like you subject those microbes to heat and pressure, and then they're all dead. Like that's the whole point of an autoclave. We used to back in the old days. We would make Thanksgiving dinner for our students, and we would cook a turkey in the autoclave. The tenderest, juiciest turkey you have ever had is autoclave turkey. We're not allowed to do that anymore because of rules. So here you have a well-defined food desert. Without even thinking about how that food desert came into being, you can ask yourself, are food deserts a good thing? Yeah, food deserts are great, or no, food deserts are terrible. If yes, food deserts are great, then the only really response is do nothing. The response, if they're a bad thing, is potentially do nothing, which doesn't really make sense to me, or do something. And if the answer is do something, then the question is what? This is, in flowchart form, ethical decision making based on data. The data say there is a food desert. What you do after that is all about how you apply the values that you have to a known fact. Your last written assignment for the semester is to basically write a 2-page report. I'll put guidelines up later on today maybe, or maybe tomorrow, depending on what kind of time I have available to me. 2-page paper. First paragraph should describe the food desert. This is 2 pages of writing. If you want to put in figures and things like that, it would be vulgar. But basically, define what section of the city is indicated by the data as being a food desert. Then the rest of the paper involves a justification of whether or not a food desert is a good thing. If your answer is yes, then your writing task is shorter. If your task is no, then your writing task is longer. And then describe why you came to the decision that a food desert is a good thing or a bad thing, and then describe what you think potential solutions are to the food desert issue in the city.
When is this due?
This is due the day of your final.
So,
Friday.
Next Friday. You can get it to me before then if you want. No more than 2 pages.
you want to
You don't want to grade more than 2 pages?
Well, I don't have time to grade more than 2 pages because I have to turn in grades on Monday. So I have to get everything graded and turned in by Monday. Yeah, if you have sources that are outside sources, then definitely reference them.
do you want us to like run by you with the word? just like make sure you keep it big or?
If you're critically thinking Williamsville College students, you should know what a good quality source is and what a not good quality source is.
Get it.
No, this is an ethical reasoning thing. The only source that you really need to reference ultimately is the data.
Oh, by the way, apparently electricity went out all over campus.
Oh, good.
Every part.
Yeah, so I'm basically looking at what your ethical reasoning skills are. Good. Nice.
Also, I totally forgot my food journal.
Okay, just bring it by. Yeah, everybody.